The premise does not work as printed. The protocol requires an independent review.
Then the review should proceed.
It asks for positive integers.
Score the answer according to the printed version.
So the ranking changes. The proof should have been checked. It shows what each blocked path changes.
By the time 16-year-old Maya Reed reached the front row of the lecture hall at Columbia University, the professor in charge had already decided she did not belong there. He had not seen her solve a problem yet. He had not seen the notebook in her backpack, the one with the split spine and the taped corners filled with equations squeezed between bus schedules, grocery lists, and her little brother's spelling words. He had not seen the way she counted without moving her lips, or the way her eyes tracked patterns across a room, the way other people followed music. All he saw was a girl from Brownsville in a faded navy hoodie, carrying a backpack with one broken zipper and a stack of sharpened pencils held together with a rubber band. And because of that, Professor Richard Ellison made the quiet mistake that would eventually undo him in front of everyone. He mistook where she came from for what she was capable of. The competition was called the Columbia Honors Mathematics Invitational, and to the students who had grown up around private tutors, summer research camps, and glass-walled prep schools, it was not just a contest. It was a gate. The winners were noticed by universities. Their names traveled into recommendation letters, scholarship meetings, and quiet conversations between people who knew exactly which doors opened early for the right kind of child. For Maya, the invitation had arrived in a thin white envelope with a Columbia seal printed at the top. Her mother, Tanya Reed, had found it under the apartment door after coming home from the night shift at a hospital laundry facility, her hands still smelling faintly of bleach and warm cotton. The envelope had sat on the kitchen table for almost an hour before either of them opened it. Not because Maya was not excited, because in their apartment, good news usually came with a question hiding behind it. How much would it cost? What form needed a signature from someone who was not around anymore? Would she need shoes, a fee, a ride, a chaperone, an ID card, a permission slip, a registration code, or some other proof that a child like her had the right to walk into a room built for children who never had to prove anything? Maya read the letter 3 times. Then she read it once more to her brother Jonah, who was 9 and cared less about mathematics than about whether Columbia had vending machines. She had qualified through the citywide public school round. Out of thousands of students, she had placed first among sophomores and high enough overall to receive a direct invitation to the final event on campus. Her school counselor, Ms. Alvarez, cried when she saw the email confirmation. She tried to pretend she was only blinking too much because the office heater was broken, but Maya saw her turn toward the filing cabinet and press one hand flat against the drawer. At Frederick Douglass Community High, praise was usually careful. Teachers did not want to promise too much. They had seen too many bright students flattened by rent, sickness, family duty, violence, paperwork, and exhaustion. Hope was precious there, and nobody wasted it on speeches that could not survive the bus ride home. But Ms. Alvarez made a copy of the invitation and put it in a plastic sleeve. She told Maya that Columbia did not send those letters by accident. Maya wanted to believe her. Still, on the morning of the contest, she almost did not go. It was not fear, exactly. Maya had lived around fear long enough to know its different shapes. There was the quick fear of sirens too close to the building, the slow fear of an overdue bill, the sharp fear when Jonah got sick and their mother started counting cash in the bottom of an old coffee tin. This was different. This was the feeling of standing outside a beautiful door and wondering whether the door had been designed to make you feel grateful for being allowed to touch the handle. Maya woke before sunrise. The radiator hissed like it was arguing with itself. In the kitchen, her mother had left oatmeal in a covered bowl and a note written on the back of an old hospital schedule. Tanya's handwriting leaned forward, tired but determined. Eat before numbers. Numbers behave better when you do. Maya smiled at that, even though her stomach was too tight for breakfast. She packed her pencils, her calculator, even though the rules said it would not be allowed, 2 peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and the old notebook she had carried for 3 years. The notebook was not impressive. Its cover had once been purple, but the color had rubbed away around the edges. The pages were filled with math nobody had assigned her. Some of it was copied from library books. Some of it was built from videos watched on borrowed Wi-Fi in the hallway. Some of it was her own language, invented because nobody had been around to tell her the official names. There were grids she called stair maps. There were residue circles drawn on paper plates. There were pages titled shadow tables where she tracked how one blocked path changed every possible route after it. She had created those tables at the laundromat on Pitkin Avenue, waiting for her mother's uniforms to dry. The floor tiles there were cracked in 2 places, and one of the dryers only worked if someone kicked the bottom panel before putting in quarters. Maya would sit on a plastic chair with her knees tucked under her, watching people move around laundry carts, broken machines, puddles, strollers, and bags of detergent. At first she counted routes to pass the time. If the blue cart was blocking the middle aisle, how many ways could a person get from the door to dryer 7 without crossing the wet spot? If Mrs. Benitez had 2 baskets near the folding table, and the little boy with the red sneakers kept running in circles, which route stayed open longest? Other people saw clutter. Maya saw constraints. And constraints, she learned, were not just obstacles. They were information. When a path closed, every path after it changed. The change moved forward like a shadow. If 2 shadows overlapped, you had to be careful not to count the darkness twice. She did not know at 12 years old that mathematicians had formal words for some of what she was doing. Inclusion, exclusion, recurrence, graph invariant. She only knew that a blocked square was never just one blocked square. It had consequences. That idea became a private comfort. It made the world feel less random. A missed bus, a closed grocery store, a bill paid late, a teacher who left halfway through the year, a father whose name appeared on old forms but not at the dinner table. All of it made shadows. All of it changed the routes available. But if you could see the shadow clearly, maybe you could still find a way through. Maya took the train to Manhattan with her contest ticket folded in the pocket of her hoodie. At each stop, the car filled with people carrying coffee tote bags, instrument cases, backpacks, flowers, and sleep. By the time she transferred uptown, she had already solved 2 warm-up problems from a photocopied packet Ms. Alvarez had given her. She wrote the answers on the back of an electric bill. At 116th Street, she stepped out into a cold brightness that made the buildings look washed and serious. Columbia rose in front of her with its stone steps, iron gates, and wide paths swept clean of the kind of city dust that seemed permanent back home. Students crossed the campus as if they had been born knowing where to go. Maya paused by the gate just long enough to look at the printed map. She had promised herself she would not look lost for more than 5 seconds at a time. The competition check-in table was inside a lobby with polished floors and tall windows. A banner hung behind it, deep blue with silver lettering. Parents stood in clusters, comparing schools, coaches' summer programs, and test scores, with the soft aggression of people pretending not to compete. Maya got in line behind a boy wearing a blazer with brass buttons. His father was telling someone that the preliminary round had been easier than expected because apparently many schools sent students who were enthusiastic but not truly prepared. Maya looked down at her shoes and did the prime factorization of the number printed on the father's conference badge. It steadied her. When she reached the table, the volunteer asked for her name. Maya gave it. The volunteer checked the list once, then again. The pause was small, but Maya knew small pauses. She had heard them in school offices, clinics, apartment management rooms, and anywhere else a person behind a desk was deciding whether she had misunderstood her own life. Before the volunteer could find the name, a tall man in a gray suit stepped beside the table and glanced at Maya's ticket. This was Professor Richard Ellison. His photograph had been on the competition website, beside a paragraph about number theory excellence and the responsibility of elite institutions to identify promise wherever it appears. In person, he looked like someone who had spent many years being listened to before he finished speaking. He asked whether Maya was there with the contestant. Maya explained that she was the contestant. The volunteer found her name then near the bottom of the page where the public school qualifiers had been printed after the sponsored academy teams. Maya saw the label beside her school community finalist. Professor Ellison's eyes rested on that label for half a second, too long. He did not say anything openly cruel. That would have been too easy to name. Instead, he gave her the kind of polite smile that closed a door without making a sound. He told the volunteer to make sure Maya received the standard instructions because the invitational used a much more rigorous format than local competitions. Local competitions. Maya held the strap of her backpack tighter. The volunteer handed her a badge. It had her first name printed correctly, but her last name had been cut off after 3 letters, so it read Maya Ree. The boy behind her laughed under his breath. Professor Ellison did not correct it. Maya took the badge and walked toward the lecture hall. Inside, the seats rose in curved rows around a central board. Students were already settling in, placing pencils in straight lines, adjusting watches, comparing strategy in low voices. Some had coaches beside them. Some had parents who touched their shoulders before leaving, as if sending them into a ceremony. Maya chose a seat near the front because she had learned that when people expected you to hide, sitting where they had to look at you could feel like a small proof. An undergraduate assistant came down the aisle with blank scratch paper. She had a round face, tired eyes, and a silver ring shaped like a tiny moon. Her name tag read Priya Shah. Priya noticed Maya's badge, then noticed the truncated last name. Without making a fuss, she took a pen from her pocket and wrote the missing letter by hand. Maya Reed. It was such a small correction that nobody else saw it, but Maya felt her breathing loosen. The opening remarks began at 9. Professor Ellison stood at the front and welcomed the students to what he called a proving ground for disciplined minds. He spoke about elegance, rigor, and intellectual honesty. He said the contest existed to reward not speed alone, but clarity of thought. Maya listened carefully. She liked the phrase intellectual honesty. It sounded clean. The first round lasted 90 minutes, 10 problems, no calculators, full reasoning required. When the packets landed on the desks, Maya did not open hers right away. She pressed her palms flat against the paper, closed her eyes for one breath, and remembered her mother's note. Eat before numbers. Numbers behave better when you do. She had eaten 3 spoonfuls of oatmeal on the train, which she decided had to count. Then she opened the packet. The first problem was a sequence. The second was geometry. The third involved divisibility. Maya moved through them with a quiet focus that made the room recede. She did not solve like the students around her. They wrote in polished columns, naming theorems with the confidence of people who had been taught the proper labels. Maya's pages looked different. She boxed small observations. She drew arrows. She made quick tables, crossed out routes, circled leftovers, and translated the formal wording into a shape she could hold in her mind. But the answers came. Not easily. She had to fight for them. On problem 4, she made a false start and had to tear the corner off a scratch sheet to cover it so her eyes would stop returning to the mistake. On problem 7, her proof felt too long, and she compressed it by finding a symmetry she had almost missed. Then she reached problem 8. It was one of Professor Ellison's own contributions. The packet marked it with his initials at the bottom, a small vanity that most students probably did not notice. The problem began with a condition involving two positive integers. Find all ordered pairs of positive integers a and b, such that a squared plus b squared equals 2027. Then, use those pairs to evaluate a related expression. Maya read it once, then again. Her pencil stopped moving. At first, she assumed she was tired. She checked whether she had copied the number wrong into her head. 2027. She wrote it in the margin. 2027. Then she divided by 4. Remainder 3. Maya sat back very slightly. Every perfect square was either 0 or 1 modulo 4. A square could not leave a remainder of 2. It could not leave a remainder of 3. So the sum of two squares could only be 0, 1, or 2 modulo 4. Never 3. There were no such positive integers. The problem had no solutions as printed. For a moment, the room became too quiet. Maya looked around. Other students were writing. Some had skipped ahead. A few were chewing pencil ends, frowning at the page. Nobody was raising a hand. She read the problem a third time, searching for a phrase that would save it. Maybe it said modulo 2027. Maybe it said less than. Maybe it said not necessarily integers. No, it asked for positive integers. It asked for something impossible. Maya knew what an impossible problem felt like. Not hard, not deep, not unfinished. Impossible had a texture like pushing a key into the wrong lock. You could wiggle it forever, blame your hand, blame the light, blame the door, but the metal would not turn. She wrote a short proof in the answer space. Since every square is congruent to 0 or 1 modulo 4, the sum of two squares is congruent only to 0, 1, or 2 modulo 4. But 2027 is congruent to 3 modulo 4. Therefore, no ordered pairs of positive integers satisfy the premise, and the requested expression is undefined. She underlined as printed. Then she moved on. She did not know that this one sentence would become the first crack in the room's confidence. When time was called, the proctors collected the packets, row by row. Maya placed hers on top of her scratch paper and watched Priya carry the stack to the scoring room. The students filed into a reception area where tables had been set with fruit pastries, coffee, and little bottles of orange juice. Maya took one apple and slipped it into her backpack for Jonah before choosing a cup of water. Near the windows, students compared answers. A girl with a green headband said problem 8 was brutal, but she thought the answer might be empty. A boy from a Westchester academy said there was no way the committee would print a problem with no solutions. So there must be a hidden trick. That sentence traveled through the room faster than the math did. There was no way the committee would be wrong. Maya heard it in 3 different forms. Each version carried the same assumption. Authority was more reliable than observation. She knew better. At 11:30, the preliminary scores were posted on a screen. Students crowded around it. Maya stayed near the back until the first wave moved away. Her name appeared lower than it should have. Maya Reed, 61. She stared at the number. 61 was not disastrous, but it made no sense. She had left only one proof incomplete, and even that should have earned partial credit. Based on the scoring guide from previous years, she expected something in the 70s. She scanned the names above her. Several students she had overheard struggling with problem 8 had received scores in the high 60s. The boy in the blazer had a 74. Maya did not panic. Panic wasted arithmetic. She found Priya near the hallway and asked carefully whether contestants were allowed to request a score review. Priya looked uncomfortable before she answered. That told Maya the review process existed, but was not love. There was a form, Priya explained, but it had to be signed by a faculty scorer. Maya asked where to get one. Priya glanced toward the closed scoring room. Inside, through a narrow window in the door, Maya could see Professor Ellison speaking with 2 other judges. He held a packet in one hand. Even from a distance, Maya recognized her handwriting on the top page. The door opened. Professor Ellison stepped out. Priya began to explain that Maya wanted to ask about her score. The professor did not wait for the full sentence. He said many first-time contestants overestimated their performance because advanced scoring rewarded complete reasoning, not intuition. Maya kept her voice even and told him she understood. She asked whether she could see which problems lost credit. The professor's expression sharpened just enough to show irritation under the polish. He said individual packet reviews were not part of the public schedule. Maya asked about the form. For the first time, he looked directly at her, not at her badge or her hoodie or the label he had already attached in his mind. He told her that appeals were intended for arithmetic errors, not disappointment. Disappointment. The word landed with a clean little cut. Maya could have stopped there. A familiar caution rose in her. Do not make trouble. Do not become the story people already expect. Do not give them a reason to say you were emotional, unprepared, difficult, grateful for nothing. She thanked him and stepped back, but Priya did not move. The undergraduate assistant looked from Maya to the professor and then down at the clipboard in her hands. She pointed out quietly that the rules did allow contestants to request a scoring breakdown after the first round. Professor Ellison's jaw tightened. He took the clipboard, signed the form with a hard slash of his pen, and told Priya to handle it quickly. The breakdown came 10 minutes later. Maya sat on a bench under a framed photograph of past winners and read the marks beside each problem. Most of the deductions were small. A missing explanatory sentence. A result not boxed. A proof considered inelegant but acceptable. Then she reached problem 8. 0 points. The comment beside it read, "Did not solve. Challenge to premise, not responsive." Maya read the sentence twice. Not responsive. She had proven the premise impossible, and the scorer had treated that proof as failure to understand the question. Below that, problem 9 had been marked down because her method was labeled non-standard and insufficiently justified. Problem 10 had lost points for presentation, though the final answer was correct. Presentation. The word seemed to include more than handwriting. Priya stood beside the bench, holding the edge of the clipboard with both hands. She looked like someone trying to decide how much courage she could afford. Maya asked whether Professor Ellison had scored problem 8. Priya did not answer directly. She said the initials on the comment indicated the lead judge, R.E. Richard Ellison. Maya folded the score sheet carefully. She had learned from her mother that a document treated gently could become useful later. The second round began at noon. Only the top 25 students advanced, and Maya had barely made it tied for the last qualifying position after 2 other contestants left early. Professor Ellison announced the names from the front of the hall. When he reached Maya, he paused, as if surprised by his own list. The second round was proof-based and public. Students worked at tables while judges circulated. The top 8 scores would move to the final board challenge in the afternoon. Maya felt the pressure differently now. Before, she had wanted to do well. Now she had to carry the weight of being doubted and the weight of not letting that doubt make her sloppy. That was a heavy combination. She solved the first proof cleanly. The second took longer. The third, a combinatorics problem about arranging colored tiles under a restriction, opened like a familiar door. She used a shadow table. The official-looking way would have been to define a recurrence with 3 variables and carry it across cases. Maya saw the same structure as the laundromat aisle. A red tile blocked one pattern, and the blockage moved forward. 2 restrictions overlapped, and the overlap had to be returned. Her pencil flew. A judge with silver hair stopped behind her, watched for almost a minute, and asked where she had learned that notation. Maya said she had made it up because it helped her not count the same absence twice. The judge smiled before he remembered judges were supposed to look neutral. Professor Ellison also passed her table. He stopped when he saw the grid of arrows and shaded boxes. He did not smile. He asked whether she could translate her work into a conventional recurrence. Maya explained the recurrence in words pointing to each row and each subtraction. The method was conventional underneath, even if the clothing was homemade. Professor Ellison told her that mathematics was a shared language, and that private notation could obscure weak reasoning. Maya nodded. Then she rewrote the proof in formal symbols on the right side of the page, line by line, while keeping the shadow table on the left. He had no comment after that. By the end of the second round, Maya's hand ached. The cheap pencil had left a groove in her finger. When she turned in her packet, Priya gave her a look that was almost a question. Maya gave the smallest nod. She had done enough. She knew it. But enough was not always the same as enough for the people holding the list. The afternoon finalists were posted at 2:15. Maya's name was not there. She stood in front of the screen while the hallway noise folded around her. 8 names. None hers. The boy in the blazer was 5th. The girl with the green headband was 7th. A student from a private academy who had left 3 blanks in round 1 was 8th. Maya was listed under alternates. 9th. 1 place out. 1 point behind. She did not cry. She did not storm into the scoring room. She did not give anyone the satisfaction of a scene. She walked to the restroom, locked herself in a stall, and pressed both palms against the cool metal door. For 30 seconds, she let herself feel the full shape of it. The wrong score on problem 8. The deductions for presentation. The way the professor had decided before the first proof what kind of student she was allowed to be. The exhaustion of having to be not just correct, but correct in a way that survived someone else's contempt. Then she took the folded score sheet from her pocket and looked at the 0 again. 0 was a clean number. It could mean nothing. It could also mean a place to start. When Maya came out, Miss Alvarez was waiting near the lobby doors. Her counselor had taken 2 trains after morning meetings at school, carrying a canvas bag full of forms because she never trusted institutions to have the right paperwork twice. Her hair had come loose from its clip, and one side of her coat collar was folded under. She did not ask whether Maya had won. She asked what happened. That was why Maya loved her. Maya showed her the score sheet. Miss Alvarez read the comment beside problem 8. Her face changed, but she kept her voice low. She asked whether Maya was certain. Maya explained the modulo 4 argument in less than 20 seconds. Ms. Alvarez closed her eyes, not because she doubted it, because she understood exactly how much trouble a true thing could cause when the wrong person needed it to be false. Together they went to the appeals table. The volunteer there seemed startled that someone was actually using it. He found a second form after looking through 3 folders. Ms. Alvarez filled in Maya's name, school, contestant number, problem number, and basis for appeal. At the bottom, where the form asked for requested action, Ms. Alvarez wrote, "Independent review of problem validity and scoring impact." She pressed the pen so hard that the final word nearly tore the paper. The appeal should have gone quietly to the judging committee. Instead, it found its way back to Professor Ellison first. He emerged from the scoring room holding the form as if it had personally disappointed him. He told Ms. Alvarez that the competition could not be delayed by speculative objections from contestants unfamiliar with advanced problem design. Ms. Alvarez did not raise her voice. She had spent years inside school systems. She knew how to make calm sound like a locked door. She explained that Maya was not speculating. Maya had submitted a proof that the stated condition was impossible. Professor Ellison said the intended solution required deeper interpretation. Maya asked, before she could stop herself, whether the deeper interpretation changed the remainder of 2027 when divided by 4. The hallway went quiet around them. A parent turned. One of the finalists looked up from his phone. Professor Ellison's face colored, not dramatically, but enough. He told Maya that sarcasm would not strengthen her appeal. Maya wished instantly that she had not said it that way, not because it was wrong, but because she knew tone could be used as a shovel to bury content. Before the professor could walk away, Priya appeared with a tablet in her hand. She said the appeals protocol required 2 judges not involved in the original scoring to review any validity challenge before final rankings were certified. Professor Ellison looked at her the way some people look at a chair that has spoken. Priya's fingers tightened around the tablet, but she did not lower it. Ms. Alvarez asked for the protocol number. Priya gave it. That was the second small correction of the day. The first had restored the missing letter on Maya's name badge. The second kept her appeal alive. Maya was asked to wait in a seminar room while the committee reviewed the problem. Miss Alvarez sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. On the wall hung portraits of mathematicians from another century, all stern collars and distant eyes. Maya wondered how many of them had been told they did not belong in some room before they became portraits in another. She took out her notebook, not because she needed to study, but because holding it reminded her of who she had been before Columbia's hallways tried to rename her. The old pages opened to a shadow table from 2 summers earlier. The pencil marks were smudged. In the margin, 12-year-old Maya had written, "If blocked, count what can still breathe." She ran her thumb over the sentence. After 20 minutes, the door opened. Priya entered first. Behind her came the silver-haired judge from round 2, whose name was Dr. Ansel Pierce, and another judge, Dr. Lena Okafor, a visiting mathematician from MIT who had been observing the invitational as part of a youth outreach partnership. Professor Ellison came last. His expression had reorganized itself into something official. Dr. Pierce asked Maya to present her reasoning. Maya stood. Her knees felt untrustworthy, so she placed one hand on the back of the chair. She explained that every integer square was congruent to 0 or 1 modulo 4. Therefore, the sum of 2 integer squares could only be 0, 1, or 2 modulo 4. Since 2027 was congruent to 3 modulo 4, there could be no positive integer pair satisfying the condition. The rest of the problem depended on a set that did not exist. She did not decorate it. She did not apologize for it. When she finished, Dr. Okafor asked whether she had considered the possibility that the problem intended A and B to be residues modulo 2027 rather than positive integers. Maya said yes. Then she pointed to the line that asked for ordered pairs of positive integers and the later phrase that referred to their ordinary sum. Dr. Okafor nodded. Dr. Pierce looked at Professor Ellison. The silence changed temperature. Professor Ellison said there appeared to be a typographical issue in the printed version. Typographical issue. Maya looked at the packet on the table. The issue had taken 8 points from her score and nearly removed her from the final. It had been called disappointment. It had been called not responsive. It had been called unfamiliarity with advanced design. Now, because other experts were in the room, it became typography. Dr. Pierce asked what the original number had been supposed to be. Professor Ellison said 2025. Maya's mind moved before the room did. 2025 was 45 squared. It could be written as 0 squared plus 45 squared, but the problem required positive integers, and there were other representations too. The intended expression might have worked if the rest of the wording matched, but the printed number was not 2025. The printed number was 2027. Dr. Okafor turned a copy of the packet toward herself, checked the rest of the problem, and said that the scoring impact had to be corrected. Professor Ellison suggested awarding all contestants partial credit. Dr. Pierce disagreed. The students who had identified the impossibility and justified it had answered the problem as printed. Students who had forced a solution to a false premise had not. There were only 2 students who had done that. Maya was one of them. When the scores were recalculated, Maya did not move from 9th place to 8th. She moved to 1st. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. The numbers sat on the page with an honesty that made every earlier assumption look foolish. Professor Ellison adjusted his cuffs. Dr. Okafor looked at Maya's round 2 work again, especially the shadow table beside the formal proof. She asked Maya where she had learned to compress path restrictions that way. Maya almost gave the answer she thought they wanted. She almost said she had studied recurrence relations from a textbook. That was partly true, but it was not the root. So she told the truth. She said she learned it at a laundromat by counting roots around broken dryers and baskets, then later realized the same idea worked for contest problems. Dr. Pierce laughed softly, not at her, but with the pleasure of seeing a mind arrive by its own road. Professor Ellison did not laugh. The committee had a practical problem now. The final round was scheduled to begin in 10 minutes, and the public list had already been posted. Parents and students were gathering in the auditorium. Removing someone from the final would cause embarrassment. Dr. Okafor said embarrassment was not a mathematical category. Miss Alvarez covered her mouth with one hand, but Maya saw her smile behind it. The corrected list was printed and posted. Maya Reed moved from alternate to finalist. The hallway noticed. It is hard to describe the sound of a room recalculating a person. It was not applause. Not yet. It was more awkward than that. A soft disturbance. A few whispers cut short, a parent leaning closer to the screen. The boy in the blazer reading the list twice. The girl with the green headband turning toward Maya with something like respect and maybe a little fear. Maya did not enjoy it as much as she thought she would. Being underestimated had hurt. Being suddenly visible felt strange too. She wanted the math to be the thing everyone saw first. But people rarely surrendered their first story about you all at once. They revised it in pieces, reluctantly, like correcting a problem they wished had been printed differently. The final round took place in the main lecture hall. 8 contestants sat at separate boards facing the audience. Each would receive the same problem. They had 40 minutes to solve it, then 5 minutes to present their reasoning. The winner would receive a scholarship award, a research mentorship, and the engraved silver medal that sat in a velvet box on the front table. Professor Ellison stood to introduce the challenge. By then, his tone had changed. It was smoother, more careful, almost too careful. He explained that the final problem would test not only computation, but structure, the ability to find order inside restriction. Maya heard that phrase and felt the smallest spark inside her chest. Order inside restriction was the first mathematics she had ever known. The problem appeared on the screen. It described a 12 by 12 city grid. A student could move only north or east from the southwest corner to the northeast corner. Certain intersections were closed. Certain pairs of streets could not be used consecutively. The task was to count the number of valid routes and justify the result without listing them individually. The diagram looked messy at first glance. There were block points, forbidden turns, and a diagonal band of restricted crossings. Several contestants began by writing formulas. One drew a matrix. Another started labeling every intersection with coordinates. The boy in the blazer stared at the screen with the stiff posture of someone whose confidence had met a locked door. Maya did nothing for the first minute. She looked. The grid on the screen was cleaner than the laundromat, cleaner than Brownsville sidewalks after a storm, cleaner than the route from her building to Jonah's school when construction closed one side of the street and the corner stores stacked crates in front of the curb cut. Still, it had the same bones. Start here, end there. Some paths blocked. Some choices poisonous only because of what came immediately before them. Do not count the same absence twice. She drew the grid small in the upper left corner of her board. Then she drew it again, transformed, rotated slightly in her mind, so the diagonals became rows of consequence. She labeled the start with 1. From there, she began building a shadow table. Every open intersection received the sum of the ways into it. Every closed intersection cast a subtraction forward. Every forbidden pair cast a narrower shadow, not over a point, but over a transition. Where 2 shadows crossed, Maya marked the overlap with a tiny circle and added it back once. The first few rows were simple. Then the restrictions began. A blocked point near the lower third removed 70 routes downstream. A forbidden turn near the center removed more, but only from paths carrying a particular previous direction. Another closure overlapped both, and Maya had to split the count into 2 small states, arriving north arriving east. That was the key. Most contestants were trying to carry the whole grid at once. Maya carried the memory of the last step, not the whole past, just the part of the past that still mattered. She had learned that from life before she learned it from math. You could not carry every hurt into every room. It would crush you. But you could not pretend the past had no effect either. The trick was knowing what history a problem still needed. On her board, that history became two numbers at each intersection. One for paths arriving from the west, one for paths arriving from the south. When a turn was forbidden, only one of those numbers lost its future. When a point was blocked, both went dark. When restrictions overlapped, the table remembered just enough to repair the count. Dr. Okafor, watching from the judge's row, leaned forward. Priya stood near the side wall with a stack of programs against her chest. She had stopped pretending not to watch. Professor Ellison moved slowly behind the finalists. When he reached Maya's board, he paused. This time, he stayed longer. Maya could feel him reading the work. She could also feel the old temptation to translate herself before being accused of speaking wrong. But she did not stop. She kept building the table, then wrote the formal recurrence underneath. Let E of ij be the number of valid paths reaching intersection ij from the west. Let N of ij be the number reaching it from the south. Blocked intersections send both values to 0. Forbidden consecutive moves remove only the transition that creates them. The total at the destination is E plus N. The homemade method and the shared language stood side by side. Neither canceled the other. With 12 minutes left, Maya reached the top right corner. Her total was 18,864. She checked the final rows. Then she checked the forbidden turns. Then she checked the overlaps because that was where careless counting liked to hide. One overlap near the diagonal band had been added back too early. She erased 3 digits and recalculated the last 6 entries. The new total was 18,432. Maya stared at it. The number felt right, not because it was pretty, though it was in its own quiet way. It felt right because every shadow had been accounted for. Nothing was missing twice. Nothing had been restored without cause. When time was called, 3 contestants were still writing. One had filled an entire board with a matrix expression, but no final count. The boy in the blazer had a number different from Maya's by several thousand. The girl with the green headband had the same recurrence idea, but lost track of one forbidden transition near the end. Maya capped her marker and stepped back. Her hands were trembling now, not during the work, after. That was how it usually happened. The body waited until the danger passed, then sent the bill. The presentations began. Each finalist explained their reasoning. Some were polished, some were nervous. A few tried to sound more certain than their boards allowed. Maya presented 6th. She did not begin with the laundromat. She began with the problem. She explained that the restrictions did not require remembering the entire route, only the last direction of arrival. That reduced the grid to 2 state counts at each intersection. Closed points set both states to 0. Forbidden consecutive moves canceled a specific transition. The answer followed row by row. Then, because Dr. Pierce asked her to explain the shaded marks on the side, she described the shadow table, not as decoration, as a way of seeing. She said every restriction affected all later choices that depended on it, and the table showed how far that effect traveled. It helped prevent double subtraction when restrictions overlapped. The audience was quiet in a different way now, not confused, listening. Professor Ellison asked whether her method was merely a visual shorthand for dynamic programming. The question sounded like a challenge, but Maya heard the word merely and let it pass through without catching. She answered that it was a visual shorthand, but not merely. It revealed which constraints shared descendants, so the recurrence could be checked without recomputing the whole grid. For larger grids with repeated restriction patterns, it could even compress sections by symmetry. Dr. Okafor's pen stopped moving. She asked Maya to repeat the last part. Maya did slower this time. She showed how two restricted diagonals cast identical shadows shifted by one row, and how she used that shift to check the middle band without filling every cell. It was not magic. It was not a miracle. It was a mind that had taught itself to survive messy routes by noticing what changed downstream. When Maya finished, nobody spoke for 2 seconds. Then Dr. Pierce asked Professor Ellison whether the official solution produced the same total. Professor Ellison looked down at the answer key. For the first time all day, he seemed older than his suit. The official total was 18,432. The medal ceremony was supposed to be formal. It had a printed order, a photographer, and a university administrator waiting to say a few words about excellence. But before the ceremony could begin, Dr. Okafor asked to review the full scoring record. That request changed the afternoon. Not loudly, not with drama. With paper. Packets were reopened. Rubrics were compared. Initials were checked. The 0 on Maya's first-round problem was corrected. The presentation deductions were reviewed by judges who had not seen the contestants' school labels. Her second-round proof, once marked down for non-standard notation, gained back points because the formal recurrence beside it was complete. Then someone noticed a pattern. Maya was not the only public school student whose unconventional method had been scored more harshly than the same logic written in academy-trained language. 2 other students had lost points for presentation where their reasoning was correct. Their losses had not changed the winner, but they had changed how the room understood the contest. Professor Ellison's comments were not openly insulting. That almost made them more revealing. Lacks polish. Intuitive, but undertrained. Not competition ready. Unclear mathematical culture. Besides students from elite programs, the comments were different. Promising approach. Minor gaps. Elegant idea despite incomplete execution. Same weakness. Different story. The committee did not announce all of that to the auditorium. Institutions rarely undress themselves in public all at once, but the consequences began that day. The final rankings were certified with Maya Reed in first place. The silver medal was placed around her neck by Dr. Pierce, not Professor Ellison. The ribbon scratched slightly against the back of her neck. The medal itself was heavier than she expected. When the photographer lifted the camera, Maya looked out into the audience and found her mother standing near the back wall. Tanya had come straight from work. She was still wearing black slip-resistant shoes and the hospital jacket she used on the train. She had missed the first rounds, missed the appeal, missed the hallway where her daughter's name moved from alternate to finalist. But she had arrived in time to see Maya announced as the winner. That was enough. Tanya did not clap first. She pressed both hands over her mouth, as if trying to hold herself together from the outside. Then Jonah, who had convinced a neighbor to bring him after school, shouted Maya's name with the full force of a 9-year-old who had never cared about auditorium manners. The room laughed. Then the applause rose. Maya stood under it, medal against her chest, and felt something more complicated than victory. She was proud. Of course she was proud, but she was also tired. She kept thinking about how close the day had come to ending differently. If she had accepted the first score, if Priya had not known the protocol, if Ms. Alvarez had not arrived with her bag full of forms, if Dr. Okafor had not been there, if the number 2027 had been treated as more trustworthy than the girl who understood it, the applause was real. So was the narrowness of the bridge that had carried her to it. After the ceremony, students and parents approached her. Some congratulated her with genuine warmth. Some seemed to be congratulating an event they still did not know how to categorize. The boy in the blazer told her that her final method was clever, then added that he had almost done something similar. Maya let him have almost. Almost was a country with many citizens. The girl with the green headband asked to see the shadow table again. Maya showed her. They stood side by side near the emptying rows while Maya explained the overlap marks. And for the first time all day, the competition felt like what it should have been from the beginning. 2 students looking at a problem together. status left outside the proof. Professor Ellison approached after most people had gone. He did not offer a grand apology. Men like him often mistook grand apologies for courage, when the real courage would have been listening earlier. He said the day had revealed several procedural weaknesses. Maya looked at him. Procedural weaknesses. There it was again, the language of softening. A wrong call became a weakness. A false score became a process issue. A dismissed proof became a typographical issue. A girl nearly erased from the final became an unfortunate irregularity. Maya wanted to answer sharply. Instead, she thought of her mother, of Ms. Alvarez, of Priya's fingers tight around the tablet, and of every teacher who had ever told her that being calm did not mean being small. She told Professor Ellison that a procedure was only as fair as the assumptions of the people using it. He had no polished reply ready for that. Dr. Okafor joined them before the silence became too heavy. She asked Maya whether she had considered applying to advanced summer programs in mathematics. Maya almost laughed. Not because the question was funny, because advanced summer programs had always sounded like something that happened behind another kind of glass. They required recommendations, fees, travel, laptops, quiet rooms, parents who could take time off, and confidence so old it looked like personality. Maya said she had looked at a few but had not applied. Dr. Okafor handed her a card. On it was an MIT email address and a handwritten note. Send me the shadow tables. Maya read it twice. Dr. Okafor explained that MIT ran several outreach and mentorship pathways for young mathematicians, and that Maya's work deserved to be seen by people who understood both formal proof and original representation. She made no promise of admission, no fantasy shortcut, no speech about destiny. That made Maya trust her more. She offered something better than a miracle, a door with work behind it. 2 weeks later, Columbia released a statement about the invitational. It was careful, but not empty. The scoring procedure would be revised. Future rounds would use blind grading wherever possible. Validity challenges would go directly to an independent panel. Scoring comments would be audited for consistency across schools. Professor Ellison would step down from directing the youth competition while the department reviewed the event. The statement did not mention Maya's hoodie. It did not mention the badge missing the last letter of her name. It did not mention the word disappointment. But Maya kept the original score sheet. She folded it once and placed it inside the back cover of her notebook, not because she wanted to stay angry forever, because proof mattered. The MIT email came on a Thursday night while Maya was helping Jonah with fractions at the kitchen table. Their mother was making rice and beans on the stove, still in her work pants, 1 foot out of her shoe because her heel hurt. The apartment smelled like garlic detergent and the rain that had gotten into the hallway carpet. Maya's phone buzzed. She almost ignored it because Jonah was arguing that 3/6 and 1/2 could not be the same because 3 was obviously bigger than 1. Then she saw the subject line, MIT, Mathematics Outreach Invitation. She went still. Tanya noticed first. Mothers often hear silence faster than sound. Maya opened the email. It was from Dr. Okafor. The message invited her to join a remote research circle for high school students with a funded summer visit to Cambridge, mentorship support, and access to problem seminars designed for students whose training did not fit traditional pipelines. There was also a line near the end that Maya read 3 times. Your shadow table representation shows unusual mathematical maturity, especially in how it preserves dependency without overcomplicating the state space. Maya did not understand every institutional detail in the email. She did understand that someone had looked at the part of her thinking Professor Ellison dismissed and seen not a lack, but a contribution. Tanya took the phone, read the message, and sat down. Before her knees could make the decision for her, Jonah asked whether MIT was better than Columbia. Maya told him it was not about better. Then she paused and admitted it was also a little bit about better. They laughed so hard, the rice almost burned. The story traveled through Brownsville faster than Maya expected. Miss Alvarez printed the Columbia statement and the MIT email, then pinned copies on the school bulletin board under a sign that said, "Read the problem carefully. Read the student carefully, too." That sign became famous in the building. Students who had never cared about math stopped Maya in the hallway and asked about the professor's mistake. Some wanted the drama. Some wanted to know whether the number really could not be a sum of two squares. A few wanted to know how to get invited to competitions that sounded like they belonged to other people. Maya answered all of them, not perfectly. She was still 16. Some days she was generous. Some days she was tired and wanted to eat lunch without explaining modular arithmetic over a carton of chocolate milk. But something had shifted. Before Columbia, Maya's talent had been treated like a surprising exception. After Columbia, it became harder for the adults around her to pretend there was no system for finding the next student like her. Ms. Alvarez started a Saturday math room in the library. At first, 6 students came, then 12, then 21 if you counted the 2 who mostly came for the granola bars but accidentally learned prime numbers while waiting. Maya did not stand at a podium. She sat at a table with everyone else and showed them how to build from what they already knew. Basketball brackets became combinatorics. Subway delays became graph theory. Corner store price changes became linear equations. Domino games became parity. Laundry routes became dynamic programming. She never told them math was easy. That would have been a lie. And Maya respected them too much for that. She told them math was allowed to begin anywhere. That was different. At home, the medal hung from a pushpin near the kitchen calendar for exactly 4 days before Tanya moved it to a safer place because Jonah kept spinning it while talking on the phone. The MIT invitation was printed and taped to the refrigerator. The tape curled at the corners from steam. The old notebook stayed in Maya's backpack. By spring, it had new pages. Dr. Okafor sent problems every other week, not the kind designed to flatter her, but the kind that made her stare out the window and question whether she knew anything at all. Maya liked those problems best. They did not insult her by being easy. Sometimes she failed for days. Sometimes she sent a solution and received 3 questions back, each one exposing a gap she had tried to step over. Sometimes she missed the old privacy of doing math alone before every success became evidence for a school, a neighborhood, a program, a headline. Recognition had its own weight. People meant well when they called her a genius. Still, Maya did not love the word. It sounded too clean, too separate from the late nights, the borrowed Wi-Fi, the teachers who stayed after school, the mother who ironed one blouse for special events, the brother who learned to keep quiet when her pencil started moving, the laundromat chair, the broken dryer, the apple saved from Columbia's reception table. Genius made it sound like she had floated. She had walked. Some days she had crawled, and some days other people had held the door open just wide enough for her to squeeze through. In June, Columbia hosted a smaller follow-up event for public school math teams. The department invited Maya to speak. She almost declined. The thought of returning to that campus made her stomach tighten in the old way. But Ms. Alvarez asked her who the room would belong to if she never went back. So Maya went. This time her badge was printed correctly. Maya Reed. No missing letters. Priya was there now, officially assigned to help redesign the Invitational's student support process. She hugged Maya quickly, then looked embarrassed by her own boldness. Maya hugged her back. Professor Ellison was not present. Dr. Pierce introduced Maya to the students, but he kept it brief. No exaggerated legend, no poverty speech, no polished tale about overcoming odds for the comfort of people who had created some of them. He said Maya had won the Invitational by doing what mathematicians are supposed to do, reading carefully, reasoning honestly, and trusting proof over status. That introduction Maya could live with. When she faced the students, she saw faces from Queens, the Bronx, Harlem, Staten Island, Newark, Yonkers, and Brownsville. Some wore uniforms, Some wore hoodies. Some had parents in work clothes standing at the back. Some had come alone. Maya did not tell them to believe in themselves, as if belief were a power outlet anyone could plug into. She told them about Problem 8. She told them how easy it was to assume the printed page must be right because it came from someone important. She told them that respect for teachers, professors, and institutions did not require surrendering their own eyes. Then she wrote 2027 on the board. She asked what they noticed. At first, the students were quiet. Then a boy in the second row said it was odd. Another said the digits added to 11. A girl near the aisle said it left a remainder of 3 when divided by 4. Maya smiled. "There it is," she said, though softly, almost to herself. Not the answer, the door. By the end of the session, the board was filled with squares, residues, routes, and small tables of consequence. The students did not all become mathematicians that day. That was not the point. The point was that nobody in the room could honestly say the language of mathematics belonged only to buildings with stone steps. Afterward, a 7th grade girl with braids waited until the others left. She held a notebook against her chest. The cover was bent, and the pages were full of drawings that looked at first like mazes. She told Maya she made maps of how people moved through her apartment when too many cousins were visiting, and she wanted to know whether that counted as math. Maya looked at the notebook. There were arrows around furniture, blocked doors, time marks, repeated routes, little symbols for noise and quiet. It was messy. It was unfinished. It was alive. Maya felt the past folding gently into the future. She told the girl that it counted if she was brave enough to keep asking what the pattern remembered. The girl nodded as if she had been waiting for permission she did not know how to name. On the train home, Maya took out her own notebook and opened to a fresh page. For a while, she did not write equations. She wrote names. Priya Shah, Elena Alvarez, Tanya Reed, Jonah Reed, even though he still thought fractions were personally rude. Dr. Lena Okafor. Then she wrote the name of the 7th grade girl from the workshop because Maya had asked and remembered it. Aaliyah Brooks. Under the names, she drew a small grid. At the lower left corner, she marked a starting point. At the upper right, a destination. Between them, she shaded a few blocked squares. Then she did what she had always done. She counted what could still breathe. Years later, people would tell the story in cleaner ways. They would say, a girl from Brownsville went to Columbia, corrected a professor's exam, won the contest, and got noticed by MIT. That version was true. It was also too simple. The fuller truth was in the smaller things. A mother leaving oatmeal under a plate after a night shift. A counselor carrying forms because she knew fairness often needed copies. An undergraduate assistant restoring one missing letter on a badge. A girl saving an apple for her brother from a table where she did not yet feel welcome. A wrong number printed with authority. A proof written by someone who had been told in a dozen quiet ways that her certainty was less reliable than someone else's mistake. Maya did win that day, but the victory was not only the medal, or the corrected score, or the email from MIT. The victory was that the room had to admit something the world forgets whenever power gets too comfortable. Brilliance is not born only where people know how to recognize it. Knowledge does not check a zip code before entering a mind. Greatness can grow under fluorescent lights, beside broken dryers, in crowded apartments, on the backs of bills, in schools with old textbooks, and in children who have been forced to study the shape of obstacles because obstacles were everywhere. The last page of Maya's old notebook eventually tore loose from the binding. Tanya wanted to throw the notebook away and buy her a new one for the MIT summer visit, but Maya kept both. The new notebook had clean pages, a hardcover, and paper thick enough that ink did not bleed through. The old one had stains, tape-folded corners, and a score sheet tucked inside the back. Maya packed them together. On the morning she left for Cambridge, Jonah handed her a pencil with his name scratched into the side. He said it was for emergencies in case MIT ran out of smart pencils. Maya promised to return it sharpened. At the station, Tanya held her daughter for a long time. No speech, no grand advice. Just one hand on the back of Maya's head, the way she had held her when she was little and feverish, and still counting ceiling cracks to distract herself. When the train pulled away, Maya opened the old notebook. The folded score sheet was still there. 0 points. Did not solve. Challenge to premise, not responsive. She looked at those words one last time before turning to a clean page. Then Maya Reed wrote a new problem at the top. Not because she needed to prove Professor Ellison wrong anymore. That part was finished. She wrote it because somewhere, in some room, another student was staring at a closed path and wondering whether the problem was them. Maya knew the answer now. Sometimes the path is blocked. Sometimes the map is wrong. And sometimes the person everyone doubts is the only one reading it carefully enough to find the way through.
She made this restaurant look bad.
No, she made it visible.
This receipt says the meal was paid.
Four records tell the same story.
This void was under your manager code.
I paid for his food.
Right next year, Pena.
Hope did not shame this place.
Darlene, give me the keys.
No applause needed.
You will regret choosing her word over mine.
It was the last money I had.
I promised myself it would not leave my apron. Hope, that is emergency money. I know. But the rent is due.
Hope Sullivan had promised herself that the $50 bill would not leave her apron. It was folded twice inside a white rent envelope, pressed flat against a grocery coupon for oatmeal and a pharmacy receipt for her grandmother's heart medicine. It was not enough to fix anything. It was not enough to stop the landlord from knocking. It was not enough to make the red numbers on the electric bill look less cruel. But it was the last piece of money Hope could still point to and say, at least this much is real. By 6 o'clock that evening, that same $50 bill was sitting in the cash drawer of the Blue Lantern Grill, marked on a receipt under chicken soup, orange juice, toast, and a sandwich wrapped to go. By 6:30, Hope was standing on the sidewalk with her waitress uniform in a paper bag. No job, no rent money, and a manager behind the window telling everyone who would listen that kindness was just another word for stealing. And by the end of the week, the woman who had fired her would learn that the man she called a nuisance had a family name printed on hospitals, libraries, university buildings, and one of the largest charitable foundations in the state. But none of that was visible when the man first staggered through the door. To Hope, he was only a human being who could barely stand. That was the part that mattered. Hope was 27, though. Most mornings, she felt older before the sun came up. She lived with her grandmother, Ruth Sullivan, in apartment 3B of a narrow brick building on Waverly Street, where the hallway smelled like old carpet, boiled cabbage, and whatever the radiator decided to burn that day. Their apartment was small enough that Hope could hear the kettle whistle from the bathroom and the television from the kitchen, even when the volume was set low to save Ruth from headaches. Ruth had raised Hope from the time Hope was 9 years old, after Hope's mother died from a blood clot no one caught fast enough. Ruth had been 61 then, still strong in the shoulders, still working at a laundry, still able to carry baskets that made younger women complain. She took Hope in without ceremony. She put a second pillow on the bed, moved her church dresses to one side of the closet, and learned how to braid a little girl's hair from library books, because Hope cried whenever anyone pulled too hard. For years, Ruth had been the person who made life possible. She remembered school forms, doctor appointments, winter coats, cheap birthday cakes, and the names of teachers who were kind enough to deserve cookies at Christmas. She could stretch a pot of beans across 3 days without making anyone feel poor on the first day. She could look at a stack of bills and know which one could wait, which one could not, and which office needed a calm phone call before lunch. Then her body began asking for more than hope could pay back. First came the arthritis in Ruth's hands, then the blood pressure numbers that made the clinic nurse go quiet, then the dizziness, then the fall outside the laundromat that cracked one wrist and frightened both of them more than either admitted. Ruth's world shrank by rooms. The bus became too hard. The stairs became dangerous. The pill organizer on the kitchen table became a map Hope checked every morning and every night. Hope became the one who remembered. She woke at 5:15 before most of Waverly Street had lights on. She measured oatmeal into a chipped pot, split Ruth's pills, laid out socks without tight elastic, and wrote little notes in block letters because Ruth hated feeling managed but did not mind being reminded. She helped Ruth sit up when the pain was bad. She braided her own hair in the reflection of the dark microwave door. Then she put on her black waitress pants, her white shirt, her apron, and the comfortable shoes that had stopped being comfortable 2 years ago. The Blue Lantern Grill sat 7 blocks away under a blue neon sign that buzzed whenever it rained. It was not fancy, but it had survived long enough for people in town to talk about it as if survival were the same thing as goodness. Truck drivers stopped there before dawn. Office workers came for meatloaf at lunch. Retirees took the corner booths and argued over crossword clues. The pie case was old, the coffee was strong, and the menus had been laminated so many times the edges felt like plastic knives. Hope knew every sound of that place. She knew the cough of the ice machine before it jammed. She knew which booth wobbled unless you folded a napkin under the left leg. She knew the exact sigh the grill cook made when someone ordered egg whites during the lunch rush. She knew how to carry 4 plates along her forearm, how to smile at men who called her sweetheart without handing them her dignity, and how to hear a customer say everything was fine while already reaching for extra napkins because it was not. Hope was good at the work in a way people rarely praised, because good service is often invisible when it succeeds. Coffee appeared before it was requested. The elderly man with the hearing aid got seated away from the blender. The child with peanut allergies received a plate Hope checked twice. The woman crying quietly in booth 9 got her check folded under a clean napkin so no one would stare. The customers who noticed loved her. The staff trusted her. Her manager did not. Darlene Price had managed the Blue Lantern for almost 9 years, and she carried the keys like proof that the building belonged to her personally. She wore red lipstick that never smudged, kept her hair sprayed into a hard blonde shell, and believed kindness was acceptable only when it improved reviews. She had a voice that could sweeten in front of paying customers and sharpen in the kitchen before the swinging door closed. She called the staff family whenever she needed someone to stay late, then cut hours without warning when payroll looked high. Darlene was not loud all the time. That was part of what made her exhausting. She saved her cruelty for moments she could later describe as management. A short tip became a lecture about attitude. A sick day became proof someone lacked commitment. A customer complaint, even a ridiculous one, became a reason to remind servers that plenty of girls would love to have this job. With Hope, Darlene had a special kind of contempt. It was wrapped in pity when witnesses were around, but Hope knew the shape of it. Darlene knew Hope needed the job badly. She knew about Ruth, about the late rent, about the clinic appointments. Hope had made the mistake of explaining once, months earlier, when she asked for a schedule change after Ruth's fall. Darlene had nodded in the office, promised to see what she could do, and spent the next week telling other staff that Hope's personal drama was becoming a business issue. After that, Hope learned to say less. The Friday everything changed began with a notice under the apartment door. Hope saw the pale yellow paper before she saw anything else. It lay half inside the apartment, half in the hallway, as if even the notice was embarrassed to enter fully. She picked it up before Ruth could read the large letters at the top. 3 days to pay or quit. The phrase was cold enough to feel invented by someone who had never watched an old woman count pills at a kitchen table. Ruth asked what it was. Hope told her it was something from the building office and folded it quickly. Ruth looked at the fold, then at Hope's face, and did not ask again. That was one of the mercies between them. Ruth had spent too many years being poor to mistake silence for safety. Hope had $112 in checking, most of it already promised to the pharmacy. She had $23 in tips from Thursday in a mug near the stove, and she had the $50 bill Ruth had tucked into the sugar tin for emergencies, back when emergencies still seemed like things that took turns. Ruth had tried to stop her from taking it. Hope had insisted. The landlord, Mr. Bell, had already said he would accept a partial payment if she brought something by 5. Hope did not believe him entirely, but she believed in trying. The $50 would not save them. It might buy a week. Sometimes a week was not a small thing. A week could hold a paycheck, a clinic approval, a callback from a better job, a miracle small enough to pass for paperwork. So Hope folded the bill inside the rent envelope and put it in the deep pocket of her apron. At work, the day had already gone sour before lunch. Darlene was in the front station with a clipboard, checking the silverware rolls as if each fork had personally disappointed her. A regional owner was supposed to visit the following week. Darlene had decided this meant the staff needed to appear cleaner, faster, happier, and less expensive all at once. She sent one busser home early, scolded the dishwasher for using too much hot water, and told the servers that any mistake in the cash drawer would come out of somebody's final check if it had to. There was also a news sign taped near the register. Customers only. No loitering. No exceptions. Hope noticed it because it had not been there the day before. The tape was crooked. Darlene had written the words in thick black marker, pressing so hard the letters bled at the edges. Around noon, the blue lantern filled the way it always did on Fridays. Rain had been threatening all morning, leaving the sidewalks damp and the air heavy. Men from the body shop took the long table near the back. 2 nurses in blue scrubs ordered coffee and fries because their shift had gone sideways. A mother with twins sat near the window and apologized before either child had done anything wrong. The grill hissed, the bell at the pass rang, and Hope moved through it all with a practiced calm that lived mostly in her feet. Just after 2, the lunch rush thinned. Hope had 3 tables left. She was wiping syrup from booth 4 when the bell over the front door gave a weak jangle. The man who came in did not look like trouble at first. He looked like rain had been following him for days. His coat was too heavy for July dark wool worn shiny at the cuffs. His hair was wet at the edges and threaded with gray, though his face looked younger than the rest of him. One shoelace had been replaced with twine. A hospital band, old and wrinkled from water, clung to his wrist. He kept one hand pressed against the doorframe, as if the room had tilted when he stepped inside. The smell reached the hostess stand before he did. Wet fabric, sweat, street dust, and something sour with fear. Several customers looked up, then looked away with the quick embarrassment people use when they do not want compassion to become responsibility. The man tried to speak. His mouth moved, but whatever he said was too quiet to carry. Darlene saw him from the register. Her whole face tightened, not with concern, but with calculation. Hope had watched that expression appear whenever someone came in who might make the dining room feel less polished. A teenager counting coins, a woman asking to use the restroom, an old veteran who sometimes bought coffee and sat too long over 1 cup. Darlene stepped in front of the man before he reached the first booth. She pointed to the sign and told him the restaurant was for paying customers. Her tone had that public brightness she used when she wanted cruelty to sound like policy. The man nodded, as if he understood, but his eyes were unfocused. He whispered again. This time Hope caught one word: water. Hope stopped wiping the table. There are moments when a person knows the correct answer before the consequences arrive. Hope knew she was supposed to stay out of it. She knew Darlene had been waiting for an excuse to call her difficult. She knew the rent envelope was in her pocket, and Ruth was at home, pretending not to worry, and losing even one shift would hurt. She also knew that the man's left hand was trembling, not the loose tremble of drunkenness, not the performance of someone trying to get sympathy. It was a fine, sharp shaking that made his fingers miss the edge of the doorframe. His skin had gone the color of paper left too long in a drawer. A line of sweat ran down his temple, though the air conditioning was on. Hope had seen that look once before in a customer whose blood sugar crashed at breakfast. She remembered the gray mouth, the confusion, the sudden way the body could fold. She set down the rag and moved toward the water station. Darlene said her name. Hope kept walking. She filled a plastic cup with water, then another with orange juice from the breakfast cooler. She did not make a speech. She did not announce herself as kind. She simply crossed the floor, placed herself between the man and Darlene's pointed finger, and held out the juice first, because instinct told her water would not be enough. The man tried to take it. His hand missed. Hope guided the cup gently to his palm. By then, the room had gone quiet, in the way public rooms go quiet when people want to watch without admitting they are watching. The nurses in scrubs had turned in their booth. The mother with twins held one child still against her shoulder. Miguel, the 19-year-old busser, stood near the dish tub with plates stacked against his chest. Darlene told Hope not to encourage him. Hope asked one of the nurses to look at him. That was when the man went down. It happened without drama at first. His knees bent as if he had decided to sit on the floor. The cup slipped from his hand, and orange juice splashed across the black and white tile. Hope caught his shoulder before his head struck the edge of the hostess stand, but she was not strong enough to hold him up. Miguel dropped the dish tub. One of the nurses was already moving. Chairs scraped. Someone near the counter cursed under his breath. For a few seconds, Darlene stopped being a manager and became a woman staring at a problem she had tried to send back outside. Hope knelt beside the man. The tile was sticky under one knee. The nurse asked quick questions, checked his pulse, and told Miguel to call 911. Darlene snapped that no one was using the restaurant phone for a non-customer, then seemed to hear herself and looked toward the booths to see who had noticed. Everyone had. Miguel used his own phone. The man's eyelids fluttered. The nurse told Hope to get something with sugar and something steady if he could swallow. Hope went to the kitchen window and asked Tasha, the line cook, for toast, soup, anything ready. Tasha reached for a bowl without hesitation. Darlene blocked the pass. She said food had to be paid for. The sentence landed so cleanly that for a moment nobody answered it. The man was on the floor. An ambulance was on the way. Orange juice was spreading toward the leg of the hostess stand. And Darlene, still wearing her manager keys at her hip, was worried about inventory. Tasha stared at her. Miguel stared at her. Hope stood with one hand braced on the counter and felt the rent envelope in her apron pocket as if it had grown warm. She thought of Ruth at the kitchen table, trying to cut a blood pressure pill with hands that no longer obeyed her. She thought of the notice under the door. She thought of Mr. Bell's office closing at 5. She thought of what $50 meant when you had already run out of ways to make math gentle. Then she took the envelope from her pocket. The bill looked painfully clean against her damp fingers. She smoothed it once on the counter because it had been folded hard. She told Darlene to ring up chicken soup, toast, orange juice, and a turkey sandwich to go. She added a side of potatoes because the man looked as if he had not eaten enough in more than one day. Darlene's mouth curved with something too small to be a smile. She rang the order slowly, making sure the people near the counter could see. The total came to $38.42. Expensive because Darlene entered everything separately and added the to-go charge. Hope placed the 50 on the counter. Darlene picked it up between two fingers, held it to the light as if Hope might have forged the last money she had, and put it in the drawer. The receipt printed with a thin mechanical whine. Hope tore it off before Darlene could throw it away. She did not know why she kept it. Maybe because poverty teaches people to keep proof. Maybe because Ruth had always said a receipt was a small witness that fit in your pocket. Hope folded it once and tucked it into the man's coat pocket so the hospital would know what he had been given if he woke confused. Tasha brought the soup. The nurse helped the man take small sips once he was alert enough. His hand shook around the spoon. He did not eat much before the paramedics arrived, but the color began to return slowly to his mouth. Hope stayed beside him holding the cup when his grip weakened, not touching him more than necessary, not asking questions he could not answer. Just before they lifted him onto the stretcher, his eyes found hers. He looked ashamed. That was what stayed with Hope later. Not gratitude first, shame. A man could be sick on a restaurant floor saved by strangers and still feel he had done something wrong by needing help where polished people could see him. Hope told him softly enough that only the nurse and Miguel heard that he had nothing to apologize for. His lips moved around one word, Hope. At first, she thought he was asking for it. Then she realized he had read her name tag. The paramedics rolled him out through the front door into the wet afternoon. The bell above the door rang again, too cheerful for the moment. For several seconds, the blue lantern stayed quiet. Then sound returned in pieces. A fork against a plate. A child whispering. Tasha calling for an order. Miguel wiping juice from the floor with shaking hands. Hope stood and turned back toward the register. Darlene was waiting. She did not fire Hope in the office. That would have left too little audience. She fired her beside the pie case where the customers at the counter could hear every word and the servers in the back station could pretend not to. Darlene said Hope had violated policy, created a scene, disobeyed a direct instruction, exposed the restaurant to liability, and used the blue lantern as if it were a shelter. She said Hope's judgment was poor. She said people who brought personal feelings into business could not be trusted with money. Hope reminded her that she had paid for the food. Darlene said that was not the point. But it was the point, and everyone knew it. The $50 bill had gone into the drawer. The soup had been paid for. The sandwich had been wrapped. The only thing Hope had stolen was Darlene's ability to pretend the man was not her problem. Darlene told Hope to take off her apron. There are humiliations that burn because they are loud, and there are humiliations that burn because they require you to cooperate with them. Hope untied the black apron at her waist with fingers that would not work right. Her name tag caught on the strap. Miguel took one step forward, then stopped when Darlene looked at him. Tasha stood in the kitchen window, one hand flat on the stainless steel shelf, jaw clenched hard enough to ache. Hope placed the apron on the counter. Darlene slid a paper across the register, an incident statement already printed from the office template. Hope saw phrases like unauthorized food distribution and aggressive refusal to follow management instruction. Near the bottom, Darlene had written suspected cash irregularity in blue pen. That was when Hope's shame cooled into something steadier. She refused to sign. Darlene's face changed. Only a little, but Hope saw it. A manager who used paper as a weapon did not like when someone refused to help sharpen it. Hope gathered her sweater, her purse, and the pair of backup shoes she kept in the staff closet. She had no dramatic exit, no speech, no final insult. She walked through the dining room while people looked down at menus they were no longer reading. At the door, the mother with the twins touched Hope's arm. She did not say much, only that what Hope had done was right. Hope nodded because if she opened her mouth, she would cry. Outside, the rain had finally started. Not heavy rain, just enough to make the sidewalk shine and flatten the loose hairs around Hope's face. She stood under the awning with her paper bag against her chest and checked the time. 4:12. Mr. Bell's office was open for another 48 minutes. Her rent envelope was empty. For one wild second, Hope almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the day had become so impossible that her body reached for the wrong sound. She walked home in the rain. Ruth knew before Hope said a word. The old woman was sitting in her robe at the kitchen table, a crossword puzzle open beside her pill organizer. The apartment smelled faintly of menthol rub and tea. Hope placed the paper bag on the chair and took off her wet shoes. Ruth looked at the bag, then at Hope's empty apron pocket, and folded the crossword slowly. Hope tried to tell the story in a practical way. A man got sick. She bought him food. Darlene fired her. The 50 was gone. She would find another shift somewhere. She would call the landlord. She would figure it out. Ruth listened without interrupting. When Hope finished, Ruth reached across the table and placed her bent fingers over Hope's hand. The touch was light because her joints hurt, but it carried the weight of all the years she had used those hands to keep Hope alive. Ruth did not say Hope had been foolish. She did not say everything would be fine. She said with a tired little breath that doing the right thing can still leave a bruise. That made Hope cry harder than comfort would have. The next 3 days were made of phone calls that went nowhere. Mr. Bell's office offered sympathy in the dry voice of a woman reading from a screen. The pharmacy said Ruth's refill could not be split again. The Blue Lantern did not answer when Hope called about her final paycheck. When she went in person, Darlene met her at the door and said checks were processed on the regular schedule, assuming there were no unresolved drawer issues. The phrase was soft enough to be legal and sharp enough to cut. Hope applied at 2 grocery stores, a hotel breakfast room, a sandwich shop, and a nursing home cafeteria. She borrowed bus fare from a neighbor and hated herself for needing it. She cleaned Ruth's pill organizer twice because doing something with her hands kept panic from climbing her throat. At night, she lay awake, listening to Ruth breathe in the next room, counting the seconds between coughs. On Monday morning, an envelope from the county court arrived. Eviction hearing date. Hope sat on the closed toilet lid and read it 3 times, because the bathroom was the only room where Ruth might not see her face immediately. The paper did not shout. That was the cruelty of it. It simply arranged disaster into neat paragraphs with a date, a time, and instructions for appearing before someone who would decide whether home was still theirs. At almost the same hour across town, the man from the Blue Lantern woke fully in a private hospital room and asked for the waitress. His name was Caleb Whitcomb. The last name was heavy in that city. Whitcomb Children's Hospital, Whitcomb Hall at the university, the Whitcomb Center for Housing Justice, the Whitcomb Family Foundation, whose grants kept free clinics open, funded elder care programs, and quietly paid for motel rooms when families were one night away from sleeping in cars. Caleb's grandfather, Arthur Whitcomb, was the kind of rich people described with numbers because ordinary adjectives stopped working. Newspapers called him a billionaire, a philanthropist, a real estate heir, a civic leader, a complicated man with a complicated fortune. To Caleb, he was Grandpa Art, the man who once taught him to tie fishing knots with blue yarn because hooks were too sharp for a 7-year-old. Caleb had not always been lost. He had been a bright, restless boy who loved old cameras and hated shoes. He had grown into a young man who studied social work for 2 years, then dropped out after his mother died in a highway crash that tore a hole straight through the family. Grief did not make him noble. It made him vanish in pieces. He refused counseling, then accepted it, then left. He struggled with pills after a surgery and shame after that. He disappeared for weeks, returned, disappeared again. He hated being followed by security. He hated being recognized. He hated that every mistake he made could become a family scandal before it became a human wound. Arthur had money Investigators, doctors, lawyers, and a staff trained to solve impossible problems politely. None of that gave him the legal right to force an adult grandson to come home. For almost 18 months, Arthur's foundation outreach team had kept a quiet watch, not a public search. Caleb had begged them not to turn him into a headline. They checked shelters, hospitals, warming centers, encampments, and clinics. Sometimes they found him, and he refused help. Sometimes he accepted a clean shirt and vanished by morning. Sometimes Arthur sat in the back of a town car outside a shelter, too proud to cry in front of his driver and too frightened to leave. The day Caleb collapsed at the Blue Lantern, he had been trying to get to a clinic that knew him. He had not eaten since the night before. His blood sugar dropped. The rain started. He saw the blue sign and thought he could ask for water without becoming a problem. Instead, he became a test. When Caleb woke, he remembered tile under his cheek, the taste of orange juice, and a young woman saying he had nothing to apologize for. He remembered her name tag because the word had struck him with painful irony. Hope. Arthur listened to the story from a chair beside the hospital bed, his hands folded over the silver handle of his cane. He was 81, narrow now in the way old men become after losing too many people. But his eyes missed very little. He had built companies by noticing what others hid in footnotes. He had spent the last 20 years trying to give away money in ways that did not simply polish his name. When Caleb told him the waitress had paid for the food herself, Arthur asked how much. Caleb did not know. When Caleb told him the manager fired her, Arthur did not speak for a long moment. Then he asked for the receipt. The hospital nurse found it in the pocket of Caleb's wet coat, folded once soft at the edges from rain and handling. The top read, Blue Lantern Grill. The items were listed one by one: chicken soup, toast, orange juice, turkey sandwich, potatoes. Total $38.42. Cash tendered $50. Server Hope S. Arthur held that little strip of paper as if it were a legal document. In a way it was. It said, someone had seen a man in crisis and answered with food before identity. It said the meal had been paid for. It said the accusation of theft had a problem before it even began. Most of all, it said that the person with the least power in the room had acted with the most responsibility. Arthur asked his chief of staff, Mara Singh, to find Hope Sullivan. Mara was careful. People with money can frighten poor people even when they come bearing gifts, and she knew that better than most. She began with the hospital intake note, then the employee name on the receipt, then the public employment records connected to a wage complaint Hope had once filed and withdrawn because Darlene made her life miserable afterward. By Tuesday afternoon, Mara had an address on Waverly Street and enough restraint not to arrive with cameras. Hope almost did not open the door. She had been sorting coins on the kitchen table when the knock came. Ruth was asleep in the bedroom with the fan pointed toward her. Hope looked through the peephole and saw a woman in a navy raincoat holding a folder against her chest. Not a landlord, not a sheriff, not anyone she recognized. That made it worse in its own way. Mara introduced herself through the door, gave her full name, and said she was from the Whitcomb Family Foundation. Hope thought first of scams, then of debt collectors, then of some complaint Darlene had invented with a name expensive enough to scare her. Mara did not push. She left a business card on the hallway floor and stepped back toward the stairs. That small retreat did more than any official title could have done. Hope opened the door on the chain. The conversation lasted 12 minutes in the hallway. Mara explained that the man Hope had helped was alive, recovering, and grateful. She did not begin with the money. She did not mention the word billionaire. She asked whether Hope would be willing to meet with the family at a time and place Hope chose. She said there was no obligation. She said Caleb wanted her to know he had not forgotten the orange juice. Hope's throat closed around that detail. People had been calling her irresponsible for 3 days. Darlene had told her she lacked judgment. The landlord's notices treated her as a problem with a deadline. Even the job applications made her reduce herself to gap states and references that might betray her. And here was a stranger in a hallway telling her that the man she had helped remembered the orange juice. Hope agreed to meet the next morning at the foundation office because the bus stopped 2 blocks away, and because Ruth, after hearing the story, told her to put on the blue blouse. The Whitcomb Family Foundation occupied 3 floors of a restored brick building downtown. Hope had passed it many times without knowing what happened inside. There were no gold gates, no marble lions, no guard who looked her up and down. Just glass doors, a reception desk, and a wall of framed photographs showing clinics, housing projects, school gardens, and people standing in front of buildings with shovels and tired smiles. Hope arrived 20 minutes early because being poor makes lateness feel like a character flaw other people are waiting to confirm. She wore the blue blouse, Ruth liked black pants, and the only flats that did not pinch. In her purse, she carried Ruth's medication list, the eviction hearing paper, and 3 copies of her resume because she did not know what kind of meeting could happen in a building like that. Arthur Whitcomb stood when she entered the conference room. That surprised her. Men with that much money, she assumed, did not have to stand for waitresses. He was tall but stooped, dressed in a gray suit that looked old rather than fashionable, with a cane resting against the table. Caleb sat beside him in a clean sweater, thinner than Hope remembered, but unmistakably the same man. His hair had been washed. The hospital band was gone. The shame in his face had not disappeared, but it had loosened. Hope did not know where to put her hands. Arthur thanked her without making it a performance. He did not call her an angel. He did not say she had saved the family's heir, as if Caleb were a possession returned. He said she had treated his grandson like a person when it would have cost her less to look away. He said the family could never make that moment unhappen, and they could not make her firing painless, but they could answer it honestly. Then he slid the receipt across the table. Hope saw the items, the total, the cash line, her name. The paper looked smaller in that room than it had felt at the register. She touched one corner and remembered Darlene holding the 50 to the light. Arthur asked about her job. Hope told the truth in pieces. She had been fired. Her final paycheck was being delayed. Darlene had written something about cash irregularity. Hope had not stolen anything. She had paid. The words came out controlled, but her hands trembled in her lap. Mara took notes, not in a cold way, in the way people take notes when they expect facts to matter. Arthur asked what Hope wanted to do if survival were not making every decision for her. The question almost made her angry, not because it was unkind, but because wanting had become a luxury she did not trust. Hope wanted Ruth to be able to bathe without fear of falling. She wanted rent paid before the notice came. She wanted shoes that did not hurt. She wanted one morning in which the first thought in her head was not a number. But those were not dreams. Those were repairs. Arthur waited. Hope looked at the photographs on the wall. A woman receiving keys to an apartment, a nurse leaning over a blood pressure cuff, volunteers stacking grocery boxes, a folding table under a church awning with a sign for emergency meals. She said finally that she liked helping people before they had to beg. The room went quiet around that sentence. It was not polished. It was not the kind of answer people put in a brochure. But it was the truest thing Hope had said all week. Arthur did not offer her a mansion. He did not hand over a blank check. That would have made a cleaner fantasy and a poorer story. Instead, he described a job the foundation had been trying to design for months and failing to fill properly. Community Outreach Coordinator Trainee. The role would help connect restaurants, clinics, shelters, and elder care programs so people in crisis could get food, transport, and paperwork help before a bad day became a disaster. It required patience, memory, practical judgment, and the ability to treat frightened people with dignity. Hope almost laughed again, but this time because the job sounded like a formal title for what poor women had been doing unofficially forever. She said she did not have a degree. Mara said the position included training. Hope said she had never worked in an office. Arthur said offices could teach filing systems more easily than they could teach moral attention. Hope looked at Caleb. He did not say she should take it. He did not make gratitude into pressure. He only looked back with wet eyes and nodded once, as if he understood that accepting help could be its own frightening act. The offer came with a salary higher than anything Hope had earned: health insurance, paid training, and flexible caregiver leave. Separately, Mara explained the foundation had an emergency housing program with published rules. If Hope qualified, they could help with rent arrears the same way they helped hundreds of families a year. It would be documented. It would not be a secret gift slipped under a door. That distinction mattered to Hope more than Arthur could have known. Charity can feel like another kind of control when it arrives without respect. This was different. This was a door with paperwork expectations and a desk on the other side. Hope accepted the interview process, not the job yet. Arthur smiled at that. He seemed to like that she insisted on doing it properly. 3 days later, Hope received the official offer. The same afternoon, the housing program approved a temporary grant that paid the arrears on apartment 3B and arranged for an occupational therapist to assess Ruth's fall risk. Hope cried when she got the email, but not because all her problems were gone. They were not. Ruth was still fragile. The apartment still had a radiator that clanked like a hammer in winter. Hope still owed money in places no grant had touched. But for the first time in months, tomorrow did not feel like a wall. Hope began work the following Monday. The foundation office smelled like coffee printer toner and raincoats drying in corners. Her desk was small and near the window. Someone had placed a yellow legal pad pens, a nameplate, and a computer monitor on it. The nameplate read, Hope Sullivan Community Outreach Trainee. Hope stared at it longer than she meant to. At the Blue Lantern, her name had been pinned to her shirt so customers could use it. Here it sat on a desk, as if she belonged to a future. Training was harder than she expected. There were databases, privacy rules, intake forms, referral pathways, grant codes, consent language, and meetings where people used acronyms as if they were seasoning. Hope went home with headaches the first week. More than once she wondered whether Darlene had been right in a different way, whether she was good at carrying plates and not much else. Then a clinic called about an elderly man who kept missing appointments because the bus transfer required him to stand too long. Hope found a volunteer driver program no one had connected to his file. A shelter called about a woman who had been barred from a meal site after a panic attack. Hope recognized shame disguised as anger and helped arrange a quieter intake. A restaurant owner worried that giving meals to people in crisis would bring chaos. Hope explained exactly how chaos begins when hungry people are treated like trespassers before anyone asks what they need. Her old life did not disappear. It became evidence of competence. Arthur noticed. Mara noticed. Caleb noticed too, because after his discharge he began volunteering quietly with the outreach team, not as a redeemed prince in a clean sweater, but as a man learning how to show up without making his recovery into a speech. Some days were good. Some days he canceled. Hope respected him more for not pretending healing was a straight line. For almost 2 weeks, Hope let herself breathe. Then Darlene found out. It happened because a local reporter wrote a short piece about the Whitcomb Foundation's new emergency meal initiative. Hope's name appeared near the bottom, not as a hero, but as a new trainee helping design restaurant partnerships. The article mentioned gently that the program had been inspired by a recent incident in which a food service worker helped a man experiencing a medical crisis. The Blue Lantern was not named. Darlene recognized herself anyway. By 8 that morning, she had sent an email to the foundation's public address, copying the Blue Lantern's owner, Vernon Klein, and 2 local business association board members. The subject line read, "Concern regarding recent hire." The body was polished in the way accusation becomes when someone knows blunt cruelty will not serve her. Darlene claimed Hope had been terminated for cause after misusing restaurant resources, causing distress to customers, and creating a liability incident involving an unhoused individual. She suggested Hope had a history of cash irregularities. She attached the incident statement Hope had refused to sign, now bearing a typed note that said, "Employee declined due to hostility." Then Darlene added the line that made Mara's eyes narrow. She wrote that organizations should be cautious about rewarding people who manufacture compassion for attention. Hope was called into a meeting that afternoon. Mara hated having to do it. Hope could tell. Still, foundations had procedures, and public accusations could not be ignored simply because they smelled false. Mara explained that Hope was not being fired. She was not even being suspended. But the foundation needed to review the allegation before putting her in front of partner restaurants. They would request records from the Blue Lantern. They would speak to witnesses. They would document everything. Hope heard the words and understood them. Her body heard something else. Her body heard Darlene beside the pie case. Her body heard suspected cash irregularity. Her body heard every manager who had ever known a poor worker could be frightened into silence by a phrase placed in a file. For a moment, Hope was back in the apartment bathroom with the eviction paper in her hand. She asked if she should resign. Mara's face changed then, not with pity, with something firmer. Mara told her that a person who tells the truth does not make a liar's work easier by disappearing. That sentence stayed with Hope all night. The investigation began with the receipt. It was small, but it had teeth. The receipt showed the meal was paid in cash. It showed the server number. It showed the exact time, 2:17 p.m. It showed $50 tendered and $11.58 due back as change. Hope had never received that change. At the time, she had not cared. The man was on the floor. Her job was dissolving. Change felt like a ridiculous detail, but details have a way of waiting. Mara requested the point-of-sale records from Vernon Klein, the Blue Lantern's owner. Vernon was not a villain. In some ways, that made his failure more ordinary. He owned 3 small restaurants and spent most of his time worrying about rent, food costs, payroll, and online reviews. Darlene had worked for him for years. She was efficient. She kept labor low. She handled complaints before they reached him. He had rewarded those things without asking who paid the human cost. When the foundation asked for records, Vernon expected an embarrassing misunderstanding. What he found instead was a sequence of edits made under Darlene's manager code. At 2:17, Hope's transaction was entered and paid with cash. At 3:04, after the ambulance had left and Hope had been fired, Darlene voided the transaction under the category Customer Disturbance. At 3:07, she opened the cash drawer manually. At 3:12, she created an internal note stating suspected employee comp abuse. At closing, the drawer showed no shortage. In fact, it showed an overage close enough to the change Hope never received. That was the first crack. The second came from Miguel. Miguel had been quiet the day Hope was fired because he needed his job too. He lived with his older sister and helped pay for her nursing classes. Darlene knew that. She knew exactly which employees could not afford courage at full volume. But guilt had been working on Miguel since the moment Hope walked out in the rain. When Mara called, Miguel asked whether he could lose his job for answering. Mara told him the foundation could not promise what Darlene would do, but a wage rights attorney could explain his protections before he spoke. The next morning, Miguel came to the foundation office wearing his work hoodie and carrying his phone like it weighed more than it should. He had not filmed the collapse. He said it felt wrong to point a camera at a sick man. But after Darlene started accusing Hope of theft, Miguel had taken a photograph of the register screen while pretending to wipe the counter. The screen showed the paid transaction before Darlene voided it. He had also photographed the incident statement Darlene left on the office copier, the one that did not yet mention cash irregularity. That phrase appeared only later. Miguel apologized to Hope before he handed over the phone. Hope told him fear was expensive. She knew that better than anyone. The third crack came from Tasha. Tasha had saved the kitchen ticket because Darlene tried to charge the soup and sandwich against kitchen waste. Tasha did not trust Darlene's numbers. She had been keeping photographs of odd tickets for months, mostly because staff tip-outs never seemed to match sales on busy nights. Her folder contained more than Hope's meal. It held voids, manual drawer openings, deleted staff meals, and charity jar deposits that appeared on paper but never reached the local shelter listed near the register. What began as Hope's vindication widened into something uglier. Darlene had been skimming small amounts for a long time. Not enough at once to trigger panic. $5 from a tip envelope, $12 from a voided cash order, a charity jar emptied before the shelter volunteer arrived. When staff asked questions, she blamed errors on servers, especially the ones who were too young, too desperate, or too tired to fight. Hope had not been Darlene's first target. She had only been the one whose receipt reached a billionaire's desk. That fact did not make Hope feel triumphant. It made her cold. She thought of every dishwasher who had gone home short, every waitress who had believed she miscounted, every customer who dropped coins into the charity jar under a paper sign that said, "Meals for Neighbors," and trusted the money would become food. The fourth crack came from a customer. Her name was Alma Hennessy, a retired school secretary who had been eating grilled cheese at the counter when Caleb collapsed. Alma had not known Hope personally, but she knew enough about public shame to dislike it on sight. She had written down the time in her pocket calendar because the ambulance blocked her rideshare driver from reaching the curb. She had also kept her customer receipt from that day, which showed she paid at 2:35, while Darlene's later statement claimed Hope became aggressive before 2:20 and disrupted payment operations for nearly an hour. Alma's receipt did not sound dramatic. It simply proved Darlene lied about the timeline. By the end of the week, Vernon Klein asked for a meeting at the Blue Lantern before opening. He invited Darlene, Hope, Mara, Arthur's attorney, Miguel, Tasha, and 2 staff members from payroll. Arthur came too, not because he needed to intimidate anyone, but because Caleb asked him to stand in the room where Hope had stood alone. Hope almost refused to go. Ruth told her to wear the blue blouse again. The dining room looked different before customers arrived. Chairs sat upside down on tables. The pie case was empty. Without the lunch noise, the Blue Lantern felt smaller, stripped of the warmth Hope had once worked so hard to create for people who never knew it came from her. Darlene arrived in a black blazer in a mood that had already chosen denial. She looked at Hope's blouse, at Arthur's cane, at Mara's folder, and then at Vernon, as if expecting him to remember who had kept his restaurant running. For the first 10 minutes, she performed concerned. She said she had always wished Hope well. She said the situation had been unfortunate. She said restaurants had policies for a reason. She said the foundation, while admirable, could not understand the liability pressures faced by small businesses. She said unhoused individuals often created unsafe environments for paying guests. She said Hope had a habit of emotional overreach. Hope listened. That was harder than speaking. Then Mara placed the original receipt on the table, not a copy. The rain-softened strip from Caleb's coat pocket, sealed now in a clear sleeve. Beside it, she placed the point-of-sale audit, showing the paid cash transaction. Beside that, Miguel's photo of the register screen. Beside that, Tasha's kitchen ticket. Beside that, Alma Hennessy's receipt. Beside that, the first version of Darlene's incident report and the edited version, with new accusations added after Hope refused to sign. The table filled slowly with paper. No one shouted. That made it worse for Darlene. Anger might have given her something to fight. Paper simply waited. Vernon read the audit logs twice. The first time like an owner looking for an accounting answer. The second time like a man realizing his trust had been used as cover. The attorney explained the void, the drawer opening, the overage, the altered statement, the delayed paycheck, and the possibility of defamation. Payroll confirmed that Hope's final check had been held without a lawful reason. Tasha's folder opened the question of wider wage theft and charity diversion. Darlene's face lost color under her makeup. At one point, she tried to say Hope had made the restaurant look bad. Arthur answered quietly that Hope had made the restaurant visible. That was the closest thing to a verdict the room needed. Vernon terminated Darlene that morning. Not with theater, not with applause. He removed her keys, disabled her manager code, and called an outside accountant before the first customer could walk in. The wage investigation that followed lasted months. Staff received back pay. The charity jar was removed and replaced by a tracked partnership with printed monthly totals. Darlene later signed a formal retraction, admitting Hope had not stolen money, misused resources, or manufactured the incident for attention. Whether shame reached her in private, Hope never knew. Consequences were not the same as repentance, and the story did not require pretending otherwise. Hope received her final paycheck, the stolen change, and a separate settlement for the false accusation. The $11.58 came in an envelope from Vernon with an apology letter. Hope stared at the coins and bills longer than she stared at the larger check. There was something almost unbearable about that exact amount. It was too small to matter and too precise to dismiss. It represented the change from the last $50 she had owned, the money Darlene had treated as if Hope were too poor to deserve an accounting. Hope took the $11.58 home and placed it in Ruth's sugar tin. Ruth laughed when she saw it, then cried a little, then pretended she had not. The Blue Lantern did not close. Hope was glad for that. Too many innocent workers depended on it, and too many regulars loved a version of the place that could still be made honest. Vernon hired a new general manager, a woman named Celia Grant, who had run a union cafeteria and believed schedules were moral documents. The staff got written break policies, transparent tip-outs, and a rule that no employee could be disciplined for calling emergency services. Near the register, the old Customers Only sign disappeared. In its place, months later, there was a small blue sticker, Community Meal Partner. The sticker belonged to the program Hope helped build. It did not mean every restaurant became a shelter. It did not ask servers to solve poverty between refilling coffee cups. It created a simple system. Participating restaurants received foundation-backed meal vouchers, crisis training, and a direct number to outreach workers. If someone came in hungry, disoriented, stranded, or medically fragile, staff had a way to respond that did not depend on one poor waitress emptying her pocket. Hope fought for that detail. She told the planning team that compassion without structure becomes a burden on the person with the least power. She knew because she had carried it. The program needed receipts, reimbursement, emergency contacts, staff protections, and dignity built into the process. No public shaming, no photos without consent, no turning hungry people into marketing. Food first, names second. Questions gently when needed. Arthur loved the idea, but Hope made it workable. That was why 6 months after the day she was fired, Hope stood in the Blue Lantern again before opening, holding a stack of training folders instead of an order pad. Her nameplate from the foundation was clipped to her blazer. Her shoes still hurt sometimes, but now she could replace them when they wore out. Miguel was there, promoted to shift lead. Tasha was there, arms folded, pretending she was not proud. Celia, the new manager, had arranged coffee and biscuits for the staff. Caleb stood near the back, not hiding exactly, but leaving room for the story to belong to Hope. Arthur sat in the first booth with both hands on his cane. Hope did not give a grand speech. She talked about what low blood sugar can look like. She talked about when to call 911. She talked about how to offer food without making someone perform gratitude. She talked about recording incidents truthfully, not defensively. She talked about the difference between safety and image. The staff listened because Hope did not sound like someone reciting policy. She sounded like someone who had knelt on their tile and paid the cost before anyone gave the cost a name. After the training, the first meal voucher went into the register drawer. It was printed on thick blue paper with a number, a reimbursement code, and a simple line at the bottom. No one should have to collapse before being offered food. Hope ran her thumb over that sentence and thought of the old sign Darlene had taped near the register. Customers only, no exceptions. She wondered how many people had turned away because of words like that. She wondered how many had learned to stop asking before they reached the door. Then the bell rang. The first customer of the morning was a sanitation worker in a reflective vest, rubbing his hands together against the cold. Behind him came an older woman with a walker. Then 2 college students. Then a man Hope did not recognize standing uncertainly near the entrance with a backpack held against his chest and rainwater dripping from his sleeves. The new hostess looked toward Celia. Celia looked toward Hope. Hope did not move to rescue the moment. That was not the point anymore. The hostess picked up a menu, smiled, and asked the man whether he wanted to sit somewhere warm while they called the outreach number together. It was a small thing. It was everything. Ruth lived long enough to see Hope settled into the work. Her health did not become perfect because a billionaire entered the story. Bodies do not obey narrative justice. She still had painful mornings. She still cursed the pill splitter. She still refused the shower chair until Hope threatened to let the occupational therapist win the argument in writing. But she had a safer bathroom, a better doctor, and a granddaughter who came home tired from meaningful work instead of broken by panic. On the day Hope received her first full benefits card, Ruth made tea and asked to hold it. She turned the card over in her bent fingers, studying it as if it were a photograph of someone she loved. Then she handed it back and said, Hope's mother would have slept better knowing this day came. Hope kept that sentence privately in the place where the deepest gifts go. Caleb continued volunteering. Some people in the city still knew him first as Arthur Whitcomb's grandson. Hope tried not to. She knew him as the man who learned the names of shelter staff who carried boxes without making a show of it, who sometimes had to step outside meetings when shame got loud in his chest. He and Hope became friends in the careful way people do when neither wants gratitude to become debt. One afternoon, nearly a year after the Blue Lantern incident, Caleb brought Hope an envelope. Inside was a $50 bill, not crisp, not framed, just folded twice. He said he had wanted to replace the one she spent on him from the beginning, but his grandfather told him to wait until he could give it as himself, not as an apology funded by someone else's guilt. Hope tried to refuse. Caleb told her he knew. Then he placed the bill on her desk beside a stack of meal vouchers and left before either of them could make the moment heavier than it needed to be. Hope carried the $50 home that night. She did not spend it. Not because she no longer needed money. Need had not vanished. It had become less violent. She placed the bill in Ruth's sugar tin with the $11.58 from the Blue Lantern. The tin sat on the kitchen shelf, dented on one side, its painted flowers chipped from years of use. Inside were coins, folded bills, a spare key, and the small arithmetic of survival. Hope added one more thing to the tin, a copy of the receipt. The original stayed at the foundation, sealed in a file Arthur jokingly called the smallest board document in Whitcomb history. Hope's copy was thinner, cleaner, less dramatic than the memory. Chicken soup, toast, orange juice, turkey sandwich, potatoes. Cash tendered. $50. Server, Hope S. Sometimes people told the story as if the receipt proved Hope was kind. Hope did not see it that way. The receipt proved only that kindness had been forced to defend itself against a lie. The real proof had happened earlier, in the few seconds before anyone knew Caleb's last name, before cameras mattered, before the foundation, before the job offer, before Arthur Whitcomb held that strip of paper like evidence. The real proof was a waitress with rent due and a grandmother waiting at home, standing beside a sick man on a restaurant floor and deciding that hunger was more urgent than fear. That decision cost her. It should not have. But because it did, other people finally saw the cost clearly enough to build something better. Years later, Hope would still correct anyone who called the job a reward. It was not a prize handed down from a grateful billionaire. It was work, hard work, human work, work that required phone calls, forms patience, boundaries, and the humility to know that one meal could not fix a life, but could keep a person alive long enough for the next right thing to happen. The Blue Lantern became one of the strongest partners in the program. Not perfect, no place is. There were staff changes, hard meetings, mistakes, and slow mornings when the coffee burned and the printer jammed, and somebody forgot to log a voucher correctly. But the stickers stayed on the register. The emergency numbers stayed by the phone. The staff knew that calling for help would not cost them their jobs. And every July, on the anniversary of the day Hope was fired, the Blue Lantern served soup and toast free through the Community Meal Fund. Hope never advertised the date as hers. But Miguel always knew. Tasha always knew. Celia knew. Caleb knew. Ruth, while she was alive, would ask for a bowl to go, even if she claimed restaurant soup needed more pepper. Arthur sent a handwritten note the first year, then came in person the second, sitting in the same booth and ordering coffee he barely drank. On the third year, a young server named Lacey found Hope looking at the register after training. Lacey had only heard pieces of the story. She asked if Hope ever regretted spending the $50. Hope thought about the honest answer. She regretted that Ruth had been frightened. She regretted the rain walk home. She regretted every worker who had stayed silent, because losing a job can feel like losing the floor beneath your feet. She regretted that the world often requires poor people to prove their goodness with receipts, while powerful people are believed on letterhead. But the $50 itself. Hope looked toward the front door, where a man with tired eyes was sitting in a booth, both hands wrapped around a bowl of soup he had not been asked to earn by explaining his whole life. She told Lacey no. Not because kindness always comes back quickly. It does not. Not because every cruel person gets exposed. They do not. Not because $50 is small. It was not small to Hope. It was rent medicine time and sleep. It was the last thin bridge over a very deep week. She did not regret it, because the man on the floor had been real. His hunger had been real. His fear had been real. And in that moment, before justice, before reward, before anyone important knew her name, Hope Sullivan had decided that real need deserved a real answer. That is why the story lasted. Not because a poor waitress met a billionaire. Because a poor waitress holding almost nothing proved that dignity does not begin with wealth, title, clean clothes, or permission from a manager. It begins in the instant one person sees another person being treated as disposable and refuses to help the room look away. The $50 bill in Ruth's sugar tin grew soft at the folds over the years. The receipt faded until the ink had to be read at an angle. The tin stayed on Hope's shelf long after she moved Ruth into a safer place, long after the eviction notice became only a paper she kept in a folder marked closed, long after Darlene Price's name stopped having the power to tighten her throat. Whenever Hope opened the tin, she saw the same small collection of proof: the returned change, the replaced bill, the receipt that remembered the cost. And beneath all of it, the lesson Ruth had given her at the kitchen table when everything still hurt. Doing the right thing can leave a bruise. But sometimes, if enough honest people are willing to look at the bruise instead of covering it, the mark becomes a map. And that map can lead the next hungry stranger to a warm booth, a bowl of soup, and a door that stays open.